Here we are on the Metal Voice. You know, we're talking round table from the four guys who went to see Bruce Dickinson live on the Spoken or the Speaking World Tour, or North American tour for that matter.
Yeah.
The second to last date, I guess, in March 23rd, we went to see him in Montreal, Canada at the MTELUS or the Metropolis.
The Metropolis. MTELUS is a type of cell phone. Metropolis is a venue.
Okay.
I never accepted those commercial.
Thank you. All right,
That is
so
a man of principle.
that's right. So it was an interesting show. It was, and you know what? I'll ask the questions for everybody around. We'll go around the table and you know give your opinion of what you thought of it. So for the people, when he continues this tour, Bruce, the people what they can expect, our reaction, our review. All right. First of all, the biggest question is, and I asked Stefan, what was your expectation and what was the reality after watching it? Just quick, high level.
I had read his book. I had read his biography. And because I've seen Maiden so many times in concert, I do know for a fact that Bruce Dickinson is an extremely eloquent, cultivated, and pretty smart guy. So by going to a spoken word tour, I was expecting to see a great storyteller with a good sense of humor who could really, really captivate an audience without music. And I think I got my money's worth. I do have some reservations about some of it, but we paid money to hear a great storyteller, and he delivered great stories for almost 3 hours with just one break. I thought that if you're into that kind of stuff, you know, if you find Bruce's banter between songs interesting, if you find Maiden lyrics interesting, even though most of them are written by Steve Harris, you will find Bruce Dickinson super interesting.
So what you're saying is
Very
expectations were met. The expectations
were met, except for one.
Okay, we'll get to that. Alan, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Late Dixon, with the big Iron Maiden poster behind you.
I agree with Stefan. You know, Bruce, I think, you know, like he said, you know, he's probably a Ritalin child growing up, and we forget sometimes his comical side. You know, if anybody read this book by Bruce, Lord Iffy Boat Race, you can see he's completely wacky, he's completely insane. And but he was able to pull it off. I was a little worried at the beginning. I mean, Bruce being Bruce, he always attempts to speak the local language, so he did a great job opening the show in French. I was just worried he was going to do it the whole show. It might have been a long night, but it was a great attempt. And overall, I think he delivered. It was hard to, you know, you can't say it was stand-up comedy. If you read his books or the Maiden biographies, some of the stories were familiar. But overall, yeah, he definitely captured our attention for almost 3 hours.
So he met your expectation.
Yeah, there were some moments I was wondering, especially at the beginning, you know, people weren't really laughing as much, or he wasn't getting the effect. But I mean, towards the end, he had everybody in the palm of his hand by the end. So.
All right. So, Perrin, did he meet your expectations?
Well, first, let me say my expectations were pretty low, right? I haven't.
Well, that's it. That's key there. But key,
I want to be honest about that, right? Like going into this, you know, coming out of the pandemic, hey, Bruce is coming to town. You know, us guys get to hang out together. I get to go see a person who's always been a favorite of mine as a singer and as a band, but not necessarily as a writer or speaker. So, you know, I was asking myself, can I take 2 to 3 hours of Bruce Dickinson's banter? Because let's be honest, right? Bruce is a great singer and he can be engaging for 2 or 3 minutes between songs. But, you know, I found his book a bit of a tougher read than some other rock metal biographies. And Bruce has the reputation as someone who can be a bit, you know, pompous, for lack of a better word. So I said to myself going in, is this going to be fun and funny and engaging? Or is this going to be kind of like a university lecture? So my expectations were exceeded because, it did wind up being kind of fun and funny and engaging. And I might have kind of heard a story or two that I hadn't heard before. And I too, like Alan, like for the first 10 minutes, I was like, because the first 10 minutes or so was about like his parents and his upbringing. And I always hate the early part of the books when they get into their childhood, because sometimes they just go on and on about it too long. But he kept that short, and then he got on to other things, and I really enjoyed the night. So I have to say that my expectations were exceeded, and not even because they were low. Even if my expectations had been kind of higher, I have to say it was money well spent, and I enjoyed the night.
And I'm going to just throw this out. I was very impressed. He transitioned from a singer to a stand-up comedian, and that is no easy feat. As the only ex-stand-up comedian on this panel, I can tell you, it's not easy doing stand-up, and it's material that you have to rehearse over and over again to get a laugh. I did see a couple of weak spots, but I agree with everything everybody said. Stefan, what were the sour points? And I know you want to talk about this.
Perrin alluded to it. Bruce is very pompous, and sometimes in his storytelling, I felt he was a bit too pompous. It was me from the beginning to the end. Okay, and knowing Bruce and how well educated he is, I thought he would be a bit more philosophical about life in general, but it was really, really about him from the beginning to the end. It says, this is what my book says. I'm going to summarize it to you for the next 3 hours. I felt that the comedy bit were not as strong as what you would hear from a professional comedian. I mean, the jokes, the setup and all of that was nothing to write home about. They were bar jokes, tavern jokes. They were not developed comedy.
That's what I said before. I could tell, like there's weak spots in this comedy, right?
But did he mean it to be comedy? That's what. See, I asked myself, did he mean it to be comedy, or is he just a guy telling some stories that are somewhat funny?
No, he put a funny twist to his life story and told it in a funny way. That's the way I look at it. And I must say that before the break, I was, I'm used to comedy shows, where a great act will perform 75 minutes of perfect material, then drop the mic and leave. And I'm there like, it's okay. It's nearing 2 hours. It's not straight comedy. I thought it was getting a bit long. And then he announces a break. And they're like, oh, there's more? Or Q&A. I could easily have shaved off half an hour to keep it a little tighter. Yeah. Did he come across as a compassionate, lovable man? No. He came across as this very lucky, ambitious, hardworking, extremely smart man. And that's what he wanted people to remember. So he wasn't very humble about himself, despite a couple of what's the word I cannot pronounce in English? Deprecation, yeah. And those moments were rather few and far between, but he had a few good flashes when he was talking about Thunderstick's makeup and said he looked like, Justin Trudeau. And we all had this
Yeah, that was the local twist.
That was the local twist. But you know what? I got to say this, and Alan, I want to hear what the negatives were. Why do Canadians like salmon? Like you said, all you Canadians love salmon. But I was like kind of wondering, I like salmon, but I didn't know that was the Canadian food.
Well, he's probably staying in 4-star hotels and eating good salmon.
Okay, before we get to Alan, Here's what Made in Quebec says. I really enjoyed the show. I really enjoyed Leandro's question. This is Pat Lalonde saying this. This is a kind of guy I would listen to for hours. So as you know, Made in Quebec, a big shout out to Pat Lalonde, the singer of Made in Quebec. Alan, what did you not like about this show?
No, I mean, it was really almost like, just to add to what Stefan said, it was almost two different shows. Before the break and the Q&A, it was a very well-rehearsed show, maybe too well-rehearsed in spots, and, looking for the big punchline that just didn't come. And then the second, with the Q&A after you take the break, it seemed to be much more relaxed and just going with the flow more. And I think I enjoyed that part a little bit more. And of course,
your question,
Pat from Made in Quebec, and Stefan and I were lucky enough amongst the thousands of questions. I have our comments or questions asked during the Q&A, so that added to it as well.
Yeah. All right. Baron, what did you not enjoy about the show?
Yeah, and just like I alluded to, like I felt like I thought the show started a bit slow. And I get it. I guess the show is flowed kind of like with the story arc of most books, right? So it starts with his home life and his upbringing, and then his schooling, and then his getting into music and finally joining Samson and Maiden. And I just felt like the piece about his upbringing and his schooling was a little bit like, I hope there's not going to be too much more of this. Like, for me, the show didn't really start until he started getting into his appreciation of Deep Purple and music, or joining Samson. That's when the show really started for me. So thank God, like most books, the upbringing part is only a chapter or two. And of this show, that was only a chapter or two. Because just hearing about his parents and his grandparents and his uncle and that kind of stuff just didn't interest me. So like in my mind, in the first 10, 15 minutes, I was like, was this a good idea? And then after the first 15 minutes, for the rest of the almost 3-hour show, I was like, yeah, I really enjoyed it. But this it started a bit slow for me.
But he did bookend the beginning, and then we saw why he spoke about his uncle and his great uncle, and it kind of bookended. And I love comedy that has those type of bookends. There
was a story arc. There is for anyone who might see the show in the future, there's a definite story arc, right? Like there is an arc to how the night flows, just like there's an arc to a movie or there's an arc to a book. So I
gotta give him credit. Like, I mean, he understands how to engage with an audience. He spoke for almost 3 hours. How long did he?
Yeah, I mean, we were there about 3 hours and 15 minutes, and there was a 25-minute intermission. But I mean, so we were there over 3 hours, and he probably spoke for 2 hours 45 minutes out of that.
Was there a British sense of humor that kind of flew over our head a little bit? That I know Alan's into that sort of Monty Python stuff, but a lot of people probably didn't get maybe some of the jokes because there was a British flavor to his comedy that doesn't transition or connect with Canadian.
Three or four that he tried that kind of just went. I think there was over all of our heads for whatever reasons, but. For me, if you interviewed everybody that was leaving the doors, if it was worthwhile, I think you'd get a 98% response that it was an evening.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Yeah. The only people I see giving this bad reviews are people who didn't go, and they say things kind of like, I couldn't imagine going to listen to Bruce Dickinson talk, But, anyone who actually went, from reviews I've seen in different cities, they've all said they were happy they went.
It's very the other thing too is that he spoke to an audience which was in large part francophone, French speaking.
Yeah, that's another part too. Yeah,
French is for me as a Quebec francophone, the British accent is extremely hard to understand, and it. Luckily now I'm fluent enough in English that I was able to understand most of what he said. But some jokes and some, playing on the words and all of that totally fell flat on me. I just didn't get it, But I'm sure I was not alone, but that's because it's Montreal. and then he played Quebec City, or he is playing Quebec City, that might be very different too, because it's even more French. But Maiden fans, the people who went are diehard Maiden fans, obviously. And if you're a diehard Maiden fan, whether you're French, English, or Croat, or Serbian, or you name it, you probably learn English listening to Iron Maiden or reading Iron Maiden lyrics. So I don't think it had much of an impact on the audience, where people walking out says, "What was he saying anyway? Qu'est-ce qu'il disait? Je sais pas." No, clearly, I think he made an effort to be understood, to articulate extremely well, to be understood. He did not exaggerate his accent on except when he was trying to imitate Nico McBrain. That was very funny.
Actually, Nico McBrain was pretty good.
Oh, that was my favorite part. My favorite parts of the show was when he was kind of spoofing Nico a little bit, and drummers in general.
So he talked about, well, first of all, he spoke French. Stéphane, did that impress you? Like, he comes out and he makes that effort. Bonjour tout le monde. He's making that 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes in French.
Well, I mean, I knew that he was fluent in French. I did not realize that he could actually, because the French he used the other night, it's not French he memorized. This is French from the guy who's learned to speak French and who could find his way around in French, whether he was in Belgium, France, or Quebec, for all that matter. So in my opinion, he didn't translate the show. He just said, let me see if I can tell this part in French. And he did extremely well. He was very, very convincing. I couldn't see Rush doing that, even though they're and probably it's part of the reason why Bruce is so beloved here. It's because we can identify with him. He's the guy who makes an effort, and I thought that the quality of his French, my God, this is like maybe not as good as Larry Gowan, but certainly way up there. And the other guy who speaks excellent French like this is David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. His French is excellent. Mick Jagger is pretty good too. But Bruce Dickinson, to go on 5-6 minutes like this, I did not see that coming at all. I did not. I thought it was a very nice gesture.
Yeah, I think so too. Commercial airline pilot, was that a funny bit? When he's flying people all over the world, or to their destination, they have no idea it's Bruce Dickinson in the cockpit.
I thought it was a great anecdote. Great anecdote. And it's funny, and I'll tell you why. I have a connection to this. I have a high school friend of mine whom I went to school here in Montreal. I think I can say his name, Yuri van Osnabrück. He was still is Dutch, and after he graduated from high school, he went back to the Netherlands, where he became a pilot for KLM and then did some charter company. And he told me that he flew with Bruce on several occasions, and this is a guy I went to see Maiden with at Verdun Auditorium in 1982. And I said to him, did it feel weird? He says, no. We sit down in the cockpit and I tell him, you realize I've seen you in concert when I was a teenager. I get that all the time. Ha, ha, ha. And next thing you know, they're flying and they're super professional. Pilots are professionals, and once they're flying, and you're my co-pilot, and that's how they work. And he told me that the Bruce he knew, because both my friend and Bruce were living in London, is that Bruce would leave his home in West London, get in the subway in his captain's uniform, with the stripes and everything, put a cap on his head, read a book or the newspaper, then gets to Gatwick Airport, which is where they were working from. And yep, I'm going on a flight. We'll be back tonight. We'll be back tomorrow, and back to his fancy home in West London, probably worth 10 times more than an average pilot could ever afford. I think the pilot part is extremely interesting in the sense that, most people would say, well, a rock star becoming a pilot. Oh, how snobbish. He has money, so he can afford to buy himself a license. Well, no, learning to become an airline pilot and a 747 pilot is a big deal. Not everyone makes it. It's like medical school. Not everyone is cut out to be. And for me, it gave me an additional insight into his intelligence and wealth of culture and being able to do so many things. Yeah, okay, I'm good in fencing. Others are good in basketball. Others are good in football. Good for him. But, a PhD or an MBA, anybody can do an MBA if they have, the basic university education. And I think when he talks about becoming a pilot and working, not just showing off, but working as a pilot, I think this is where he comes across as the most down-to-earth, modest guy, because he doesn't need to be a pilot. He's already a multi-gazillionaire, but he does it because he likes it, and he doesn't mind picking up a bunch of drunken charter jet going to the beach. Doesn't mind. Oh, it's kind of cool. I'm going to fly a big rig.
Yeah.
And for that.
Alan.
I just want to disagree with Stefan, because the flights did get awkward when Bruce goes, "Scream for me, first class! Scream for me!"
True. But I thought,
Alan, what about the cancer bit? So he does the thing about, he talks about his cancer. He did in his book. Do you think he kind of expressed
everybody
himself?
could hear their sphincters get tight when he started talking about it, because it's not a subject that's very pleasant to speak about. But the way he did it, obviously he went through it. He's allowed to talk about any ways he wants. But it was a nice, touching moment. And to know that Bruce came out the other side and he's there, he's still, he's obviously alive and well and doing this. I think it played out very well.
He was a bit vulnerable there. Like, he made himself a bit vulnerable and kind of put himself out there a little bit. And look, you can't have a night like this or a book and not tell that story, because it's a pretty significant thing that happened.
Alan, was there enough Maiden? Was there enough Maiden for the Maiden fans? And I'm going to even ask everybody out there who was there. Was there enough Maiden stories?
Well, his book, and I agree with Perrin, it was one of the ones that took me, it only picked up, I think, in the last quarter of his book. I struggled with 3/4 of that book. And again, why? Because it wasn't about Maiden. So the show is true to himself in that respect. If we're following the book and some of the stories that were repeated from his autobiography, I can see why, we were all want a little bit more. There was a lot of Iron Maiden T-shirts in the crowd. I'm sure a lot of people would like to have more anecdotes behind the scenes stories. But for me, it was life on the road, anecdotes from on the road in his life. So and again, it's his life. It's Bruce Dickinson on the marquee, and it's not
Perrin, did you want more Iron Maiden stories in there? Because it kind of, like, to me, it kind of fast forwarded a little too fast.
Well, look, you would always want more Maiden stories. What Maiden fan wouldn't? But like Alan, I wasn't necessarily expecting that, and there was enough for me. I think what I was expecting and I got was the transitioning from Samson into Maiden, and we got a couple of funny Maiden road stories that give you a little glimpse, what happens behind the scenes when you're in Poland and what happens, behind the scenes when you're in Germany, and just things that the average person hasn't encountered in their life. So while that wasn't the inner workings of Maiden, it was funny things that happened on the road with Maidens. So I wasn't expecting a night's take us through Power Slave, take us through, No Prayer for the Dying. I wasn't expecting an album by album. What was your guys' mindset when you were recording Somewhere in Time? Like, I wasn't expecting that, and I didn't get it. But I did get a few funny road stories, and I got some insight into Maiden recruiting him from Samson to join the band, and that was enough for me.
Stefan, what would you have liked to see that wasn't there?
Like I said, after a while, the me sort of got to me, in a sense that I thought he could explore themes beyond the experiences he's learned in life. I thought he would be a bit more philosophical in general, but it always focused on incidents and anecdotes and funny things. Given how intelligent he is, I thought I'd walk out of there with a few life lessons. I did have one, is that when you work really, really hard and you're really ambitious and you have incredible amount of discipline, well, you too can become Bruce Dickinson. And in the end, I think this is what we got. The guy obviously has a very sizable ego, and he delivered that ego, but not in a narratable, not in a annoying way. He did it in a likable way. The Bruce we like, the Bruce we've always liked. I didn't come out of there and say, oh, what an asshole. No. The only time Bruce ever came across as an asshole to me was during the Ozfest tour, when he kept making fun of Ozzy and Sharon every night. And we all know how that ended on the last night. And for me, this was Bruce at his best. Arrogant, yes, but with reason.
Controlled arrogance.
Are you arrogant if you can back it up? If somebody can walk the walk and talk the talk, I don't have a problem with that. So, I mean, he's done it all. He's an author, a radio podcast he brought up the other day. A little plug for his podcast.
Fencer,
yeah.
Yeah, he's an accomplished man, for sure. He's an accomplished man.
So, Perrin, somebody asked you, his show is coming to my town. Would you say, go for it? It's worth the money. Or would you say, you know what? Wait for the Iron Maiden tour.
I would definitely recommend going to see it. I thought it was interesting, engaging, and funny. I wouldn't say spend $150 on a table at the front. I think it's like a comedy show, right? It's like, you can get, like, you can kind of sit anywhere and enjoy it and listen to it. So I would say, I don't know if I would say pay top dollar for the best seat in the house, but I would tell anyone, if you're a Maiden fan and you're a Bruce fan and you'd like a little window into his life, I think you should go. I'm glad I went, and I have zero regrets spending the $60 I spent on our balcony tickets.
What about you, Al?
Jeremy, if I could just touch on what both Perrin and Stefan said as well. Sure. I walked in, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know it was going to be chronological order from his birth all the way up to where he is now. I thought it would be more like Stefan alluded to, is Lord of More philosophy, what he's learned throughout his life, taking side trips based on certain events. So overall, I mean, okay, chronological, we've all been there, seen that, heard it. But again, overall, I think it was very well done. And I think he came across, there's some parts were pure stand-up. So I think he did a great job.
So Alan, he's coming back to town with a new routine, we'll call it. And maybe this time, he's talking about stuff he didn't talk about last time. Would you go?
Yeah, I'd go. Yeah.
All right. So that means a lot, right? If you'd go back. Stefan, what about you? Would you go? Or would you recommend this to a friend? Hey, Stefan, Bruce is coming to my town. Should I go? Should I pay $50? Should I go see him? What would you say?
My answer would be, how big a Maiden fan are you? Oh, well, bought, back in the days, I bought Live After Death, and I thought Fear of the Dark was pretty cool. That's pretty much all I know. No, it's not for you. But yeah, I got every record, and I go see them every time. And I think Bruce is an engaging guy between songs. Says, go.
You know what? Actually, you just touched on something. Does this actually? I think it did. I think if you don't know Bruce and you don't know Iron Maiden, and you went to see the show, you could probably sit through it and enjoy it, because there wasn't a lot of Maiden, right? It was just basically his life and stories. But of course, it does help if you are a Maiden fan, because you could connect the dots a lot easier. But I would tell my friend to go. I would say, yeah, go. It's worth it. I liked it. I enjoyed it. And that's pretty much it. Is there anything else you guys want to say?
Does Stefan say Fear of the Duck?
That's an inside joke for the people who've seen the show.
Had to see the show.
I'm curious to see how much of each show is identical to the next. I would assume most of it is.
Yeah, I would think the first part is identical, more or less, with a couple of quirks here and there. And the Q&A, obviously, is the part that would differ every night, right? And we haven't mentioned it, but like in the lobby of the show, they had these cards where you can write your question, and allegedly backstage, Bruce reads them all, and they pick questions that are different or interesting. And he probably went through 10 or 15 questions, some of them really quickly and some of them in depth.
Like Alan's. Didn't
yeah,
he
well,
spend like 20 minutes on Alan's question?
They had their questions answered.
It's because of you. They were all like...
And Jimmy, we haven't said this, but let's look. He was very honest. I mean, the question probably comes up every night, why he left Maiden. And I think one of the more interesting parts was his reasoning for leaving Iron Maiden, and he was very honest about that. And then, people wanted to know what's going on with his solo work, because a lot of people really love his solo work. And so there was some really good pieces in there about what he's going to be doing with his solo career. And some people asked questions about Chemical Wedding, which I think is his best record. And he was answering questions about Chemical Wedding. So we haven't said a lot about the Q&A, but the Q&A alone was probably worth the price of admission, because he didn't really... Yes, he's picking what questions he wants to answer, but... he didn't shy away from things like, why did you feel like you had to leave Iron Maiden? So I thought the Q&A was very interesting as well.
I was pretty blown away that, again, I'll say this that I said at the beginning, he transitioned from a lead singer to a stand-up comedian in a sense. That transition is not easy. These stand-up comedians, so you guys know, and you probably do know, they work their material, on the open mic nights, on the Monday nights, and they work it, and they work it for years until it's refined, and then they go on stage, and they can even bomb when they go on stage. He's just jumping right into it, and you can see there's a couple of holes there in his stand-up, his delivery, and maybe his punches, but he, I'm pretty impressed. He pulled it off. It's like a TED Talk.
When you say stand-up comic, though, we don't want people to get the Dave Chappelle or Kevin Hart kind of stand-up comedy. I mean, in Britain, they got a long history of just telling stories. Billy Connolly being probably the greatest example of that. He gets on stage, he doesn't even know where his routine's going to go. He's just going to tell story after story, and one story might inspire another story. So it's a little that, you can see it was well rehearsed because of the PowerPoint presentation kind of behind him there. But I would like to see the very first shows when he attempted this. I'm sure he's come a long way since.
That's right. You know what works and what doesn't work. And I think on that note, unless you guys have something else to say.
I'm looking forward to the next Bruce show, which will be in Ottawa in October.
Oh, yeah. Iron Maiden on tour.
Backup band, Iron something, yeah.
The backup band. Alan, you good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, Karen, you good?
Yeah, I'm looking. You know what? This is probably the wave of the future. We're probably going to be reviewing a lot of spoken word tours, because as our heroes get a bit older and write their books and maybe can't tour as much, we're probably going to be doing a lot more. I'm sure we'll be reviewing the Gene Simmons spoken word tour, the Paul Stanley spoken word tour, and the Rob Halford spoken word tour at some point. So, That's right. Henry Rollins created the blueprint 20 years ago, and here we go. We're off to the races.
Well,
sorry if I'm not metal T-shirt today. I'm at a funeral, but there is life after death. So I'll be on the show next week.
Actually, I should say this before we stop. He didn't do his a cappella. He didn't sing any songs like he's been doing in all the other cities. I was expecting like Stefan wanted Prowler or Phantom of the Opera, but he didn't do it.
I think someone had to ask a certain question for that to happen. I think that those were always prompted by questions, so we didn't ask the right questions.
We didn't ask.
Well, we know that the Q&A section is not planned or rehearsed. He might have stories that he wants to connect to certain questions, but we're the living proof that it was spontaneous because he used two of our questions.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Congrats. And he didn't use the other two.
Yeah.
He didn't like mine. Mine was, would you be okay to have a Maiden Fest with Blaze Bayley, Paul Di'Anno, and all the other legacy players?
You're lucky you didn't get thrown out. You're lucky you didn't get thrown out.
I've asked Blaze this question like 10 times. I've asked Di'Anno this question. I ask every single Iron Maiden legacy player this question, but Bruce would not answer this question. It's a great question.
What is that? They had to have about 400 questions easily, or the amount of people that were.
But mine is the best question. Monty Python, he loves Monty Python. Bruce loves Bruce.
Alan won Bruce's heart with the Monty Python question.
And the Spitfire was the one-liner, that one-liner joke for Stefan.
Yeah.
And of course, Paladon gets the, he made in Quebec, he gets the big applause.
He got name dropped. I
sent him the
Jim,
video too.
you stand corrected, because he did sing "Let It Be." Remember?
Yeah,
yes,
that's the only thing.
Somebody just wrote that in.
You're fired. You're the singer. All right, guys. Have yourself a nice weekend.